Don't leave the door open. Secure your APIs with the Curity Identity Server. Curity allows you to centralize identity management policies with a solution developed by an expert team using well-established standards. Curity facilitates scalable security for apps and websites by offering a unique combination of identity and access management with API security. Protect your users, secure apps and websites, manage API access. Start your free trial today at securityweekly.com/curity. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra. Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners, we need to hear your voices. Leave us your feedback on Apple Podcasts and submit a screenshot to our giveaway form for a chance to win a $100 gift card from Hacker Warehouse. This giveaway will be open until the end of the year. We appreciate your honest feedback so we can continue to make great content for our audience. Visit securityweekly.com/giveaway to enter. And we do need that feedback. Some of that feedback is really old, since before me and Tyler were here. So me and Tyler and both the Tylers, we need.
Yeah, well, actually, Adrian, it was all the old feedback was all the negative stuff. All the new feedback's the good stuff. So we can just get more of that.
100%. All right. So today we've got a special two-part discussion for you. Yeah, I tried to put this together earlier. We were just too booked up on the show, but I'm happy that we can have it now. Maybe it's good that it's a month out, from when the trial ended, the Joe Sullivan trial. So glad we're having it all the same. We got a great panel of folks here. And, so the idea today is kind of thinking about not only the trial itself and all the factors that go into that, but also the future. What's the fallout from this? Is this going to be an anomaly in the future, or is this an important precedent? So we've got 4 special guests with us today to share their opinions on the matter. Sounil Yu is the CISO and head of research at JupiterOne. Tyler might know him. Tyler, do you know Sounil?
We've met a couple times. Sounil's the CISO at JupiterOne and actually a good friend of mine. And just a really smart person, the author of the Cyber Defense Matrix, which is a very popular book, and definitely somebody we should all get to know.
Yeah, thank you for finishing the intro there. Hi. Welcome to the show, Sounil.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Brian Markham, who is the CISO at EAB. He's an executive hacker, advisor, and mentor who has been in the IT and security space for over 20 years. And I'm wondering, now that it's not an acronym, it's just the name of the company, how do you say it? Do you say EAB or do you pronounce it? Brian?
Yeah, Adrian, thanks. We do say EAB, and it's actually really funny because one of the first things they tell you when you start is as part of the corporate detachment from our former parent company, they actually own the rights to the acronym. So we actually say EAB. It stands for nothing because we don't own that anymore. So yeah, we just say EAB.
All right. Next, we've got Rob Graham. Has been around in the industry for a little while. You might know him as Errata Rob on Twitter, or you might know him as the creator of Black Ice or Mass Scan. You've spent any time scanning the internet or securing enterprises in the early 2000s. He's not just a builder of tools, though. His ideas often spark some deep debates and discussions on Twitter and other places. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me. I didn't know what else I could say other than that intro.
Yeah, it was. Intros are tough, especially for folks who've done a lot of stuff. I don't ever want somebody to read an intro for me. Yeah, I'm like, if they want to know more about me, they can just Google me. So I try and keep them pretty short. But yeah, you've got some good stuff. Finally, Rich Friedburg, the CISO for Live Oak Bank, is with us today. Rich has led security and security teams at organizations like Blackbaud, Capital One, Fannie Mae, and was also the deputy director of the CERT Coordination Center. Welcome to the show, Rich.
Thank you, Adrian. Happy to be here.
All right. So I thought to kick this off, I might go over just some of the facts on this. It's taken a long time for the results of this to come out. I think we first found out, about the breach in maybe 2018, might have been 2017. But I've actually got the list of events. Yeah, 2018. But so a month after, so Joe Sullivan, first of all, his background was as a lawyer. I didn't realize that for a long time until I started digging into this, but he was the general counsel for Facebook and laterally moved from general counsel to CISO at Facebook. And then immediately after that role, he joined Uber as their CSO. He's always had a CSO role, not a CISO role. So for folks that read into that. But the short of it is that coming right out of testifying in front of the FTC for a previous breach that happened, I think, in 2014, it was literally a week later he found out about this new breach. Took some measures to, not let it go public, which we'll dive into some of the details of that. But the 10 days after his FTC testimony, he finds out Uber got hacked again. Kept it somewhat quiet within Uber. I think one of the assumptions also I had, that changed after some of the details of this came out. And it's important, that there are some details we don't have. Like we don't have the transcript from the court. Sentencing hasn't happened yet, so we don't have those details. But, we do know that it wasn't shared widely within Uber. So, the original assumption was everybody inside Uber knows this was a collective decision. General counsel, inside counsel had to know. Didn't turn out to be the case. So that personally, that changed a lot of my opinions on the case. But still, it's very complex. And so the attackers that originally got the data and were paid through a bug bounty platform to keep that stuff quiet, went on to hit another company and got caught after that, and then gave up Uber and said, I don't know how that comes out with the attackers talking to authorities after they got caught. But that's how we know about this breach, was from the attackers themselves. So that started this whole thing where starting in 2018, eventually, charges are pressed and we have the jury trial this year. And that brings us up to current time where I think it was October 5th, the jury read out their decision, and we haven't seen sentencing yet, but the 2 counts are obstruction of justice, which is up to 5 years in jail, and concealing a felony, which is up to 3 years. I don't think anybody expects him to have the full amount thrown at him, but we don't know. Hasn't happened. No sense.
Now, has the FTC always taken a breach notification stance? Like thinking back to 2018 and kind of where we were with the requirements for notification, that has substantially changed in today's stance. And the FTC, I know that they had the health breach notification back in 2018, but prior to that, I'm trying to remember the actual laws and rules around what you had to notify the FTC of for breaches, especially in 2018.
Yeah, so FTC is way more involved than they used to be. I just spent a couple hours the other day digging through everything on the FTC's site. But but yeah, this is so it's actually not the FTC, that I think was behind this. It was Northern California Attorney General office that brought this case.
That would make a lot more sense.
Yeah. But so jumping into this, maybe starting with the CISOs here. I'm trying not to start with too much of a too much of a trolling question, but did Joe do anything wrong here?
Yeah, Adrian, I mean, I don't mind starting. I mean, I think that he made some mistakes for sure. I mean, if you read through it, as I have a lot of questions. Having been through some incidents, one of the things that I always lean on, and it helps me because I'm not a lawyer. I know Joe has a legal background, but I don't have an understanding of the law like our general counsel does, like our outside counsel does. So as a result of that, I really rely on them and I partner with them to understand what is required, what am I required to do, and then I provide information to them so that we can manage the incident together. And they, of course, expect me to manage all the technical details of the incident response. And I feel like here there were some mistakes that happened with respect to just the decisions that were being made. I read that the CEO, Travis Kalanick, actually signed off on something on the decision to not notify. And I'm just wondering if there's all these paper trails, all these receipts, CEO was on board, GC was on board, why was Joe the one holding the bag? But then I read the details about how he told people that he didn't want to let it out, how when the new CEO came in, he didn't tell the new CEO all the details. And I think it's pretty clear that some mistakes were made in the way that this was handled by him.
So let me jump in here very quickly, and I would love to ask that same question to both Rob and Sounil as well. Did Joe do anything wrong in your eyes? Do you differ in your response? But I also want to ask a follow-on question to the comment that was just made. We aren't lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. Joe's a lawyer. Do you think maybe in this particular case, the fact that he was a lawyer caused more difficulties for him than if he hadn't been? Now, what I mean by that is, had he not been a lawyer, would he have relied more heavily on the legal team to make calls, to make the legal risk decisions instead of taking much of it onto himself, which put himself at greater risk? And I know I asked a couple questions in there. Let's start with the did Joe do anything wrong comment from maybe Sounil first, and then over to Rob. And then let's go back and kind of double check on that legal question I had.
Right. So I think in the context of, we can easily answer the question of did he do something wrong in the context of the set of actions at the very end. But I think, Tyler, what you're pointing to is what led to those decisions that resulted in the kind of actions that he may have taken towards the end. One other data point that Adrian may have left out in his bio was he was also a former federal prosecutor, right? So former U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney, I think. So there's a perspective that you would have that says, well, I think I know what I'm doing if
Right.
if I'm a lawyer, I'm a former prosecutor, and a perspective of, I think I should know what might get me in trouble and what might not, right? And so this sort of perspective of having somebody who has a deep legal background, prosecutor background, could that have been his failure point, his error, if you will, that really led to this chain of events that had the unfortunate outcome that we have here?
Yeah, I think it was even
by the way,
same.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think it was even the same office, right? Like the office that prosecuted him was the office he worked.
That's right.
Which makes this
in many ways, it's sort of like you should have known better,
bizarre.
Right? You should have known better. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think something that we shouldn't leave out here is kind of the nature of Uber at the time, right? Like this is peak Uber. This is Uber, Travis doing some arguably sketchy stuff. Stories are coming out about what it's like to be in the office there. This is a company founded on breaking laws. Uber was illegal in most of the places that they started that service. And the business model was, we're going to get this so popular, they're going to be forced to change the laws and allow Uber to be a thing. Right. And so I think that kind of, the culture there, and maybe understanding, having read a little bit about Travis Kalanick, I think kind of helps me understand like the pressure and the expectations, that Joe might have had on.
I think there's two questions here, and you kind of highlight that of did he do something illegal versus do something wrong? So, Uber was, the philosophy that you describe is we're going to do something that's illegal but right. And so kind of what we're discussing here is two separate questions. Is did Joe Sullivan do anything morally wrong, or did he do something that violated the law or violated FTC's consent agreement? And I think those are two separate questions. And CISOs should be asking themselves, if they see themselves in the same position, which things should they be doing that are wrong, and which things will cause them to fall afoul of the law or FTC regulations. And with that said, I would think that there is one thing that I think he did that is morally wrong. It's hard to say because we don't have the transcript. We only have the one-sided view of what the prosecutors give us describing his actions. We don't see his other side, the court testimony that might excuse some of them. But one thing that seems clear is that he, in his agreement with the hackers, he said, those hackers have to write in the agreement that they stole no data. Yes, they broke in, but they have to agree that they stole no data. Basically, he forced them to sign an agreement to lie in order to get their $100,000 payout. And I think that is morally wrong. That of the many things that he's been doing, they all have, I can see excuses for, like, of course, we don't want the entire company to know about this until we're prepared to announce the fact of this hack. So, of course, you don't want your security organization to leak information. But in this case, I think it's clearly wrong to say, hey, we're going to lie about it and force other people to lie about it. That is something I think that if it's legal or not illegal is not the question. Is like, do you want to be a liar? Do you want to be someone who promotes lies like that?
Right. Yeah, and it's so not just a question of did he do anything wrong or illegal. So I've seen a lot of people with the take that, okay, yes, he did, something illegal, he did something wrong, but they're not cool with the fact that the whole company, the rest of the company, like, some parts of that company should have been culpable in this and should have had to do more than pay a $50,000 fine, which is, I think they settled, just paid that fine and nothing else, no charges for anybody else there. It's just going to hang out the old CISO for 100% of the blame. So a lot of people had that problem with it. And then, it seemed like a lot of folks were worried about the precedents that some of this would set versus the expectations a lot of leadership has under CISO. So I think it'd be interesting to talk about that a little. Maybe Rich, looking at the details of this case, is this something where, if you're comfortable with your ethical stance, and the decisions you'd make in the same situation, are you comfortable with that? Or, are you worried about a situation where, it's kind of on the edge where your company expects you to do something that you're, afraid will come back?
It's good questions. I think, as you mentioned earlier, since we don't have the transcript yet, I think it's hard to piece some of this together. But I know for me, when I first read the story, like, I mean, Joe spent his career prosecuting criminals, running security at large enterprises, right? He's focused on defense. He's done a lot of good for the industry, right? There are certainly aspects of this that I think still haven't kind of fit together. But one of the big things that resonated as I read it is if Travis was engaged, CEO approved the course of action, why is this all falling on Joe? Right. I think that's hard to digest. And back to some of the earlier conversations, right? Is this kind of a standard thing that we should all be worried about as CISOs, or is this a bit of an anomaly? And I think some of these complexities around, was he acting in a legal capacity? How much did legal know? What was their org structure like? What was the governance structure like? We just don't know those answers. But I think about what that means for CISOs, and especially comparing it to what we saw with the testimony from Mudge about Twitter. Right, I think it puts CISOs in an interesting position. Right, let's say everything is correct from a governance structure. Right, you've got your governance structure where you're engaging legal's making the determination that it's a breach. What does the CISO do if they disagree? Right, do they write a dissenting opinion? Do they whistleblow? Do they fall in and align that it's a corporate decision and follow that course of action? One of the things I would love to understand is what some of that dynamic may have been, behind the scenes between Travis and Joe. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see how that comes out over time. But I think those sorts of dynamics, I think, will have larger ramifications on the industry over time.
Yeah, and
I'm
Rich,
looking forward to both the book and the Hulu special. I'm looking forward to both. Sorry, Travis, go ahead.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
So Rich, let me follow up on that question a little bit then and ask you, because we don't know those details, right? And the only people that know those details are the people that are inside the case at this point, because it hasn't been published and the transcripts aren't out there. Does that information change how you react or feel on a daily basis as a CISO at an organization today? Meaning, if the data comes out that he wasn't just, acting of his own volition and making calls without looping in the correct people, and that he was indeed looping in the correct people throughout that business, and yet he was the one that took the fall. Does that change how you feel, or not necessarily you in particular? I don't want to make this a pointed question, but CISOs in a generalized sense should feel about the security and safety of the position that they're in, given the potential for breach. Does it change how you feel on a day-to-day basis?
So my answer, I think it depends on what we see in those details, but it absolutely does have the potential too, right? And I think, there's certainly this evolution of the importance of the CISO role, how it's viewed in terms of, being a true officer of the company, not whether or not it's actually covered under directors and officers insurance. But I think, in terms of how I digest it and think about the day-to-day, right, it would certainly make me think harder about the companies in which I would be willing to accept a CISO position, right? Is the right governance structure there? Is the right support there from the board, from the GC, to have the partnership to work through these sorts of decisions as a corporate decision and not as a CISO decision alone? And I think that will be a differentiator around kind of the evolution of the marketplace for where CISOs are really engaged and supported.
Yeah, and one of the other places where we CISOs started looking deeper into our own policies and processes was who actually reports the breach, because if it's a legal matter, the CISO shouldn't be doing the reporting. It should be our GC, right? So I think that's something that a lot of us went through and said, okay, let's make sure that our IR policies and procedures actually reflect that.
Well, and Travis, you had a question earlier about did Joe having that legal background maybe negatively impact him or bring him to a place where maybe he thought he had it all taken care of? That's certainly possible. I mean, we don't know for sure, but just based on what Sounil just said, it's a lot easier when you don't have that legal background to just say, not my call, GC, you make the call, tell me what I need to do to support that decision. Not being qualified allows you to do that. Being qualified might make it might make it muckier.
Yeah. Well, that was definitely a little bit of a takeaway that I got out of that discussion too. And let me loop in Rob on this next question. So kind of following along that vein, as a CISO, if you were to take a new job and moved, let's say Uber came to you and said, hey, Rob, we want you to take the job. What do you look at differently now going into that situation? Do you have to look at your own personal insurance, your own personal coverage, your own personal risk tolerance levels? Does that change at all?
I think there's a certain set of companies like Uber, Facebook, Twitter, that you're in danger because you're so hated in the press, you're so hated everywhere that prosecutors or the FTC looking to make a name for themselves are going after these large organizations, these large famous organizations. So there's an aspect to the job that, as a big prominent tech leader, that you're in more over your head. But at the same time, I think that every CISO has the opportunity to mold to fit the requirement of the job to themselves. I mean, if you walk in and say, okay, what about Uber? Should I be afraid of? But at the same time, there's opportunity. What can I create at Uber? If I feel that I'm in jeopardy, I need to address that and make that happen. And I think that a CISO does have a lot of power to make that happen. For example, saying very clearly at the start, okay, breach notifications are the general counsel's job, and all I have to do is notify general counsel, and then I'm clear, which it sounds like he didn't do.
Adrian, you on mute, buddy? Did you have a question?
No. I thought you were going to have a follow up, so I was just I was going to be quiet.
No,
there.
see, that's always the hard part about doing these shows live is who's following up when. You take it, Adrian. Ask the next question.
So, I mean, just to throw some fire on the Travis Kalanick bit here, like I was like, okay, what kind of guy is this? I looked at his previous startups, and he had a startup around the same time as the .com bubble and Napster and all that, and he had kind of a Napster-ish type company called Scour that went under because they get hit with a $250 billion copyright infringement lawsuit. And the next startup, Red Swoosh, was nearly destroyed by tax fraud and failing to pay employees until Mark Cuban failed. So just kind of a baffling background here where almost every business model is kind of highlighted by doing illegal things. And so I guess the question is, and not all CISOs are getting away with this. We just saw Drizzle's CISO just got hit by the FTC. Well, it's not final for another couple of weeks, but basically they're saying, hey, you need to do these. You're required to do these for the next 20 years, regardless of what company you're working at. You now have kind of these security requirements and these requirements handling of data. So certainly not every CISO's getting away with this kind of stuff. But does it feel like he kind of got away with this? Should he have had some legal culpability in this? And maybe throw that to whoever wants to answer that. Go ahead.
I feel pretty passionately. I'm shocked that he has not had more culpability. Like in my mind, the fact that Joe had engaged Travis approved it, right, means it was more of a corporate decision than Joe's alone, at least in terms of how it was handled through the bug bounty program. And even with, right, absent some of the details from the transcripts, right, if some of the reporting we've seen that the GC may not have been, directly involved, again, that doesn't quite comprehend to me how that would only be on Joe. Travis very well could have pulled in the rest of his directs, pulled in the GC to talk about kind of the right way to approach it. So in my mind, those dynamics really make it much more of a corporate issue.
Does anyone else want to add any color to that piece of the conversation? Does anyone disagree or agree?
Well, he may not have informed Joe of everything. And that's what he was accused of, at least for the follow-on CEO, is that he did not tell the CEO the full scope of the problem.
The complexity of this thing is absolutely mind-boggling when you take into account, the background people that were involved, the multi-step disclosure issues. It's extremely complex, so it's very difficult to distill it down into a one-to-one mapping to like today's CISO should do X to not run into this problem. But at the same time, I think there's significant impacts at the highest level with regard to like trends, macro trends. One of the ones I want to press on, and it's not a commonly pressed trend, or maybe it is, I don't know, I don't read all the news, is I want to talk a little bit about how this impacts bug bounty programs, right? Because he paid this out, and I might have the data wrong. And Adrian, if I missed the data points here, please correct me. I believe he paid the first hack or the second hack out via a bug bounty payout. Does this change at all how bug bounties work or will be perceived by large organizations? Bug bounties have always run kind of right along the edge of gray area of whether it's, a ransom, extortion, or a true bug bounty kind of play, right? And it always comes down to how much you publicize it and kind of set the rules of engagement ahead of time, et cetera. Does this change anything in that site? Do you think this will hurt the bug bounty market or players at all?
I don't think
you have to.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with Rob on that one because I know he'll have a great comment, and then we can go from there. We'll go pick somebody else after that.
Yeah, I don't think this has anything to do with bug bounties. I mean, he clearly tried to distort the idea of a bug bounty, but I think that it's sort of a red herring. Everyone's focused on this issue, but I think it's meaningless.
Brian, did I hear your first? Sounil, go ahead.
Sorry, the way I describe it is he used a left of boom tool to solve a right of boom problem.
Can you explain what that means for the audience?
So left of boom is something that you do before something bad happens. So boom is some negative event. And a bug bounty you run as a way to discover vulnerabilities in your app and vulnerabilities in your environment before anything bad happens. A right of boom event is something bad has happened. And now you have to find that bad event and respond accordingly. Well, the whole notion of using a left of boom tool, bug bounty, to solve a right of boom problem is like saying, I'm going to use AV to deal with ransomware, which for anyone who's ever had to deal with it, that's not going to help you at all. It's the wrong tool for the job. And unfortunately, in this case, it had other consequences beyond that.
So I'll get to Rich and Brian on that same question, but I want to ask you then, Sounil, is that the difference in bug bounties between, what is an acceptable bug bounty or an ethical bug bounty model and an extortion or ransomware payout? Is that the difference, the left or right of boom scenario?
Oh, well, and I think to Rob's point earlier, that is ultimately what created the issue, the moral issue, right? Saying, hey, I want you to claim as if it was a left of boom type of activity where the researchers didn't actually create a boom, but unfortunately, that's actually what did happen, right?
Yeah, bug bounty,
this
not
shouldn't
bounty,
be
right.
Yeah, this shouldn't be an issue for most reputable bug bounty companies. And again, this isn't even a bug bounty issue, right? They were trying to leverage a brokerage so that they had a line item that matched into something that was non-plausible or admittable. That did not lead to the breach, right? So you're just trying to put a bug bounty line item and cover up a funding movage. This is a money laundering problem more than it is a bug bounty. They just happened to pick bug bounty. They could have picked a number of different uses. They could have done a pen test and paid out a pen test company. We would be talking about pen test issues. So I think it is less about the market in which they picked and brokerage which they're trying to use in order to cover up a money laundering and money line item issue.
Wow, that's a very interesting take. Rich, Brian, do you guys have any color you want to provide on the bug bounty red herring as we're potentially describing it?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I agree with the previous comment that bug bounties will often kind of walk that gray line, right? What happens if a researcher incidentally does access data is they find some sort of vulnerability, but it's in a kind of controlled function, right? There's reportability, there's NDAs in place in advance within those communities. So I agree with Sounil. It was perhaps not the right tool for that solution, and I do think it's a bit of a red herring, right? The core fundamental question was it a breach or not? Was it an extortion attempt or was it not? Those are independent of whether or not it's considered part of a bug bounty program.
Yeah, I think because the hackers went to the extortion route pretty early on, at least based on what was released by the prosecution, tells me right away that bug bounty, this was not the right avenue. It was not a bug bounty, shouldn't have been that way, and it is a red herring. I really agree with what Rob and what Rich said.
I think the other thing we have to think about, though, too, is this is not an uncommon practice, right? Like I've worked several IR incidents where in order to pay out ransomware, they have we don't negotiate with terrorists. So you're working with the government, local law enforcement, they don't negotiate with terrorists, but they have to pay that ransom. So in order for cyber insurance to pay that out, they will use a brokerage and pay that ransom. So this is not outside of the full characteristics of dealing with a ransomware through a brokerage company where you're not the one paying a fee. The brokerage company is buying the Bitcoin, paying the ransomware, and then they're charging it as a line item as part of their consultancy fee for the cyber insurance. So I still don't think this is outside of the realm of creativity for negotiating with something like a ransomware gang. I think this just was used in the wrong context. And without all the details, this still becomes such a bad situation for all kinds of conjecture. And I think that's where the entire industry is sitting. Like, from the conjecture, what do we actually do with this?
Yeah, I think on that one, I think that's really interesting. It's just that from my perspective, this was an incident right from jump. And when there is an incident, what your insurance company tells you to do is to alert them immediately, right? Because you might need assistance. And granted, the companies that I've worked have been smaller than Uber, but I still think that it applies. You bring in these partners early on in the process. I don't know how much of that happened here, but if you're going to bring in a negotiator, if you're going to bring in outside forensics, you manage all of that through counsel and your insurance company. You don't try and negotiate with the adversary on your own. It just doesn't appear that any of that happened. It doesn't look like it was ever really handled as a security incident, other than the fact that Joe asked his team to start investigating the people that were behind this. That's the only thing based on what's been disclosed that I've read that makes it look like they were actually managing it as an incident as opposed to a hush payment.
And is that even a reasonable request? Like, I've never seen, and I'm not a CISO and I've never been a CISO, but I've never seen a security organization that has, hey, this group is dedicated to researching individuals out in the real world. Like, is that even a reasonable request to ask of your team as a CISO?
I would not go anywhere near that.
Yeah, that seems like it's a little bit out of ethical bounds in isolation of itself to say, hey, we think, and I don't know the attackers' names, I forget what their names were, but we think person A and person B have done something here. We need to go find their background, research them, figure out if, that just seems like dirty to begin with. Sunil, Rob, you guys have any comment on that?
I've had experience with a lot of companies who do this. There's a lot of open source intelligence tools that can get you a long way there. For example, tracking Bitcoin often gets you to the source of who's extorting you. So I think it depends upon the sorts of talents the team might have. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I think I've got a strategy here that can help us find the identities of our hackers, that someone like Joe Sullivan will say, hey, yeah, let's give it a whirl. Let's try it. So it's not so much that he decided and carefully planned this out, so much as it's something that the team decided, depending upon what skills they had.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, if I have an ability to research and find the actual adversary, and actually work with them to remove to have the data actually purged from their environment, I will do that. Right now, that this is not talking to any investigations or lying to investigators or not reporting whatever. But my point is, ultimately, if I have an opportunity to work with an attacker to actually arrive at some sort of settlement that actually ends up securing the data again, then yes, I would want to do that.
But correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know security team organizations as well as you all do. Correct me if I'm wrong. We don't hire for that role. We don't generally hire in private investigator style investigations people. But what you're saying is, if you had the skill set, you think it's within scope of an organization. But I would imagine that the majority of security organizations don't have that skill set. Is that correct?
That would be a fair statement. We're talking large organizations that do actually have the resources to do that. And there are some threat intelligence type of organizations that will go to that step if you contract out for that as well.
And I also think there's a difference between using OSINT, using threat intel, using your team's internal capabilities, but not as a plan A. Like, maybe it's a plan B, but I really would have worked closer with law enforcement and my partners to bring this to a good conclusion for my company rather than taking it upon myself to track these guys down. I just don't think that that's a great plan A tactic.
Yeah, I also think back to.
Go ahead, Rich.
I'm sorry, I was going to back to like Sunil's example of left and right of boom too. I think you see larger enterprises use things like threat intelligence, like left of boom, right? What do we know about adversaries that may be coming after us, right? If they're coming from an IP address or there are other related IP addresses, right? And trying to kind of profile adversaries from that standpoint. Completely agree with Sunil's previous comments, like from a negotiation standpoint, right? Leveraging one of these firms that knows the threat actor groups and can kind of help, ground, what reasonable negotiations look like, expectations for, how the adversary is going to respond to certain tactics, like super, super helpful. But I certainly feel like after all of that, like going after attribution certainly feels kind of outside of the bounds of a typical security organization, more the realm of law enforcement, right? To go after attribution and prosecution.
And I think there are working groups and there are many organizations that do this well and do this right. Like you look at Fortune 1 or Fortune 1 through 5, their capability and their teams that are doing this attribution, this left of boom work, have right of boom where they're getting denial of service or they're getting C2, something landed successfully, they've shut it down very quickly as part of their remediation. They also go and work with someone like Microsoft or a cloud provider, DigitalOcean, and link all the credit cards or Bitcoin addresses that were leveraged to stand up that infrastructure, and they shut all the rest of the infrastructure down so that actor no longer is acting, and they can't go after more footholds. So I think that there are proactive and teams that do this very well, and sometimes even do the attribution of going and hunting them down. You look at some of the IRS stuff with the wallet and chain analysis. Like you can get very proactive after boom, but you are right. Like there is a very big distinction on the threat intelligence used prior to an incident, and then what attribution and steps you can legally take that make a difference. But again, at the end of the day, we're still dealing with actors doing illegal stuff. So I think strategically with the right partners and working with companies that are doing this well on teams that are doing this well can be very effective to do a little bit more active and offensively natured reactions to some of this.
Uber did successfully find out the identities of those hackers. So that tells me that they had the capabilities in-house to do so.
Or they had outsourced contract work helping.
Yeah. I love where this is going because I have kind of a spicy question to ask. Yeah, I was never a CISO either. I was very close to that role, and I was a chief incident handler for very large financial companies for a good chunk, about 5 years of my career. And I know there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of, if you only knew the kind of cases like that we dealt with that never, fell into public eye. Of course, a lot of my background is before we had regulation, before we had, a lot of this stuff was legally required to be shared. But I do wonder how much of an iceberg effect that we have here on, like, and I don't want any of you to divulge, anything that could get you in trouble or anything, but, how many CISOs saw this come out and think, oh man, if people only knew, all the other stuff that never hit the press, the headline. How much of an effect is, and Sounil, I'll start with you because you work for a large financial institution. I suspect you've talked to a lot of CISOs in your career as well. So, I guess kind of the question I wrote down here is it common for CISOs to be expected to hide breaches? Or is this really more of an anomaly?
So I don't know if it's an anomaly because of the Drizzle case that you pointed out earlier. It's creating this additional pressure now to say, what is a CISO actually responsible for? And it seems like, so what are we responsible for? We have a set of security policies and procedures, and we attest our conformance to that. And we attest that conformance to the people who buy our services, right? And so if now I'm misrepresenting that, how am I as a CISO liable? Well, we're starting to see, let's say, for example, DoD tightening the screws on that, saying, we now are expecting you to adhere to CMMC. And if you wrongly attest to your status associated with CMMC, you are now held liable. And so I think it's getting, this is not a one-off thing. It's going to grow in terms of the pressure that we're going to see here. But one thing that I would offer as a way to think about this and to understand what should we truly be liable for versus not liable for. I've made an argument that in the world of cybersecurity, we should split up the type of responsibilities that we have into two major buckets. One is what I would call cyber safety, and the other is what we call cybersecurity. Okay. Now, if you're not sure what the terms mean, it's easy to put the word, like, it's easier to understand if you put the word food in front of it. So what is food safety? It's things like hygiene, compliance, inspections, best practices. There are things like food security, which are like baby formula and Ukrainian wheat. And if you
supply
consider
chain issues.
And let's take another example: airplane safety versus airplane security. If I'm an engineer trying to make a really, really safe airplane, but some hijacker takes that airplane and crashes it into a building, am I liable for that? Okay. When you have a malicious actor coming in, specifically circumventing technical controls, is that something that I should be liable for? Now, if I'm practicing good cyber safety, or rather, I should say, if I fail to practice good cyber safety, yes, maybe you should hold me liable for that. But if an actor, a very sophisticated actor, or even not even sophisticated, but some sophisticated actor comes in and harms your environment, why should I be liable when someone, I try to practice good safety protocols, but someone comes in and violates the security aspect of it?
Yeah, no, that's a really important distinction, I think, Sounil. And I think we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll come right back with the second part of this. But just hang on, we're gonna break, go through some ads, and be right back with you.